Welcome to Lit Happens, Unpacking Senior English. I'm Adriel.
And I'm Belle.
We're experienced English teachers dedicated to supporting both new and experienced educators in a world in which we are often time poor, to empower our students to excel in their English studies.
If you're an English teacher, like us, navigating this curriculum, then this podcast is designed with you in mind. And our mission really is to break down the complexities by unpacking English nationally.
Welcome back, listeners, to Lit Happens, episode 48. We are going through our Reading to Write program, part 2 this week. And this is actually going to be our last episode for the year before we have a few new things in store coming to us next year for all our listeners here. Welcome, Belle, joining us for the last one. And we've got some exciting sort of things to go through in regards to our program, which you had already started unpacking last week, which we're really excited about moving forward. So, yeah, how have you been?
Yeah, good, thank you. Can't believe we're already at the end of the school year and that this is a wrap-up of our season 1 of Lit Happens. I think that's quite a big milestone for you and myself, Adriel. It's quite a lot of work to put these episodes together, but gosh, we've been enjoying it, haven't we?
Yeah, 100%. It's been exciting. Like I said, 48 episodes. You know, most sort of people might stop after a few episodes, but we're excited. We have had some great feedback, listeners. I know I had some recently with a few colleagues of mine who sort of listened in and are moving into other spaces, and I'm just excited as to what is happening. So that's been good. We've been excited to obviously share this journey alongside all of our loyal listeners, and excited for everyone new listening, and looking forward to what the future sort of holds for us. So it'll definitely be an exciting time. Obviously, we'll settle down a little bit over Christmas as people spend time during this season to spend time with their family, enjoy the season, the reason for the season, etc., etc. So it'll be definitely hopefully wind down a little bit, and we'll be fresh and ready coming into next year, I think. But look, let's do our last Lit Happens. Lit Happens. Oh my goodness, that's the episode. Our Lit or Quit for the year. You can see my brain's already starting to shut down.
Yeah, we've had enough.
And then we will, I know. And then we'll move into the second part of our episode. So anyway, it's a nice little festive little quit for this week. Christmas film studies to end the year. Is that lit or quit, Belle? What do you reckon?
I love Christmas film studies. I am a huge Christmas film person. I started watching Christmas films probably 3 weeks ago. I jumped the gun very early. I use the excuse that my toddler has been gung-ho about Christmas, but really I love Christmas movies. I think there are some really, really great fun ones you can do with the kids. Like The Grinch is a really good one. You know, you could talk about like the inhabitants of Whoville, and you could do a bit of anthropomorphism. Elf is a great one when you're looking at the genre of comedy, but really, I think it's a really pleasant, lovely way to unwind, especially those last few days of term where everybody's wrapped up. You all know that you're not really doing anything substantial now because you're getting ready for the next year. I think they're great. I really love them. What do you think?
Yeah, I 100% do. As you can probably see in our little banner there, I've popped Christmas study in quotation marks. It definitely is fun, and like I said, I like how you are all full teacher mode there, and wonderful. You can have anthropomorphism, and 100% you can still point things out. But our English teachers out there will definitely enjoy this time of the year, and really step into the shoes that many of our other colleagues in different KLAs always say. Your English teacher's always watching films. We watch it for a reason, we're studying the concept of Christmas during this time of the year.
Yeah, through the visual codes and conventions of film. 100%.
100%. Yeah, I think it's definitely lit. Definitely to wind down the year with our kids, and just a few of the titles that you mentioned there are awesome indeed. So it's fantastic. It's funny, actually. Remember I haven't actually done it this year. We finished a little bit earlier at the current work or placement that I'm at. Sorry, work or placement or place that I'm working in. But I
That's
remember
okay.
when we were
Everyone will
working
understand.
together previous. Yeah, 100%. Like I said, my brain's shutting down.
Mhm.
But um, when we were working together, I remember even on a few of the platforms there, you had a lot of the contemporary films have Christmas versions of things like Madagascar or
Yeah.
much like Shrek, all of these different Christmas
Yeah,
versions
true.
where you could definitely look at a few of the ways adaptations work, and all this sort of
Mhm.
stuff. So definitely, I think it's lit, and it's a nice way to wind down the year for yourself and for the students, indeed. But
Mm,
look, that's a
definitely.
nice little jolly way to end our little quits for the year. And let's get into our final episode before we say our final goodbyes and sign off for the year. So, last week, as you know, listeners, we were speaking about the first half of our program that we have rolling out on Teachers Pay Teachers. And this week we have Belle, obviously, going through the second part of it. Hopefully, we've had a few people sort of intrigued and engaged with the wonderful breakdown that Belle provided last week. But we're going to provide you part two of the learning sequence that is has been laid out for us. And look, let's just get straight into it, Belle,
Sure.
and start off with our first sort of focus area, which we're going to move into phase 4 of the learning sequence there. So, how can we support students to connect critically and deepen their conceptual understanding when it comes to this reading
Yeah.
to write unit?
Yeah, so with this transition to advanced English reading to write unit, so in that phase 4, in our learning program, we've sort of devoted about weeks 5 and 6 to it. Obviously this is all adjustable for your term and, working around other commitments and things in your school calendar, but roughly let's say about at least 2 weeks for this phase here. So in this week 5 to 6 focus, we're really trying to build text analysis here. And I
Yeah.
think what's critical, yeah, so what you've done beforehand is you've set the scene of the concept, you've introduced the rubric, you've done some related text perhaps, you've done some introductions to your core text, and you're now getting into that deeper analysis here. So what we're really trying to do is get students to synthesize or work towards a synthesis of understanding of their core text here, alongside the reading to write principles, and really engaging with the correct rubric meta language necessary here. So, a
Mm.
driving question could be something like, how do we use meta language or critical thinking to evaluate how effectively text can construct meaning or reflect context, or
Yeah.
position audiences, or perhaps represent the genre conventions that you are studying with your text type this term, because we all can see that's a big focus in the outcomes. So, really here we're looking at those specific textual elements, the reading elements here. So, the
Mm.
style of the writing of the piece of work, any themes and ideas, representation of these themes, ideas, and concepts,
Yeah.
and perhaps even writer perspectives as well being represented here. So I think that the key thing here is that critical engagement. So most teachers could note here, okay, so we're starting to set them up for understanding the text critically so that they can really
Yeah.
soon start to engage critically. But remember, this is reading to write, so there is that critical analysis and reading component, but also engaging with the creative component here. And this is where style could really come into
Mm.
it. So I think some of the
Mm.
relevant outcomes, that play a role here. So you got outcome 1, where it's the aesthetic qualities of the text and
Yeah.
power of language. So really, getting students maybe doing guided analysis with them, or workshops where you examine how language and form is constructing meaning. And this might be also where
Yeah.
you do some analytical paragraph writing. So therefore, you've also got outcome 5 coming in with the composer's persuasive text that
Mm.
experiment with
Mm.
language choices. Outcomes 2 and 3 play a role here as well. So relationship between reader, writer, and the text in terms of how context can be positioning readers, And outcome 3, how language features, text structures, and stylistic choices shape ideas, perspectives. So, you could even be doing some class discussions for this. A class debate might be really nice where you examine the representation of concept. It might be something like, to what extent does X composer's stylistic and structural craft effectively position audience to adopt a certain view of the text or a certain view of a perhaps contextual or conceptual issue. So you're engaging that critical perspective and analysis, but you're also getting them to really hone in on the language so that eventually, you would be able to actually move on to some more creative activities with this. So
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
that's where,
I like that.
that's where in this one you're deepening that critical, so that in the next phase you could kind of move a bit more onto
Mm,
creative things
mm.
as well.
I think it's also important to note for our teachers, our listeners here, and even students, this idea of supporting you guys. It's a process. Reading to write is indicative of a process, and in this phase where it's like connecting the critical sort of conception or that conceptual understanding, it doesn't just happen straight away. Even for teachers, when we're looking at the types of activities, I know we've had some of these discussions previously with some of the kids that we've come across, and I've often said this: it's like a bit of a chess game. It's like, all right, cool. Like this activity doesn't work. How am I going to adapt it? How am I going to mold it? How am I going to best? And this is the verb here. How am I going to best support my students to connect critically? It's about getting them to understand the hows and the whys, and I think that's something that our teachers definitely want to be looking at in this phase of the reading to write unit. Really engaging with those how and why questions. Making kids think about why certain, like you were saying, aesthetic qualities as per outcome 1 there are important or embedded by the respective authors of texts, and for what purpose were they used, and what are the consequences. How would, like, we can, as English teachers, all the questions, as you can sort of see, we're just
Yes.
popping these things off at the moment, but I think that's probably one of the important things as a teacher yourself. When you grab a hold of this resource, really engage with those questions. I think that's very, very important moving forward. But no, that looks good there, Bill. Let's move on then, as we continue to face through, I guess, our program here. And the second part of part 2 is going to go under the following, and it's going to look at phase 5 here. It says, in what ways can we craft activities where students experiment and reflect on their critical and creative compositions?
I think you have to be quite deliberate in what kind of writing activities you are getting your students to do, because I think you're mindful of the critical reading and analysis component. So, perhaps in the previous phase, you were prepping them more for that critical approach and perhaps a bit of a mock essay or some analytical body paragraphs, but it is reading to
Mm,
write. So we also need to be, thinking about those writing creatively and even reflectively, because I know we're going to talk about
mm,
that in the next question. But ultimately, the most common assessment type for this is a composition with a reflection. So
mm,
you want to
mm,
make sure, and I know that in last week's episode in part 1, we talked about a couple of writing activities, but really I think in this second half, you're transitioning into the writing, and you can see that with the
yeah.
outcomes. We've got outcome 4, composers, persuasive, discursive, imaginative, and reflective texts that experiment with language
Mm,
forms and features. And then you've got outcomes 5, which are all about composing text, exploring a range of meanings, drafting, editing. And then we've got our outcome 6 that's going to be represented here in that
yeah.
reflecting. So when you're crafting, I think it's a good idea to make sure that this little mini writing activities you're engaging with in this phase are going to complement what you're about to get them to do in the assessment task. So
Mm,
you're prepping them with that skill, or perhaps you're giving them an opportunity to have a draft of something that they could then
yeah.
adapt for their specific assessment task. So I mean, one kind of driving question that you could have here is how can a student purposely, with purpose, craft a piece of writing that communicates a nuanced meaning. And I think nuance is
Mm.
quite important in the advanced course. It's really good to get students thinking about, well, yes, love might
Yeah.
be a key idea that we looked at in the genre, for example, but what is a nuanced approach or understanding of it that you can
Mm.
then reflect in a narrative with didactic intent? So again, it's going to be dependent on what text and genre you've chosen and what core ideas and concepts you're looking at, but really getting students to think about their evolving voice as a writer in here. So therefore
Yeah.
we've really, tried to put activities that represent this idea of voice. So, textual concepts here, you're looking at that point of view, style, perspective.
Mm.
In some of the little creative writing activities, we've got a bit of argument and authority playing out. So, for example, you can do a mini discursive or persuasive response, where students are kind of presenting a bit of an argument in their own perspective and their own voice.
Yeah.
That could be something, really simple, like how do authors use genre and style to develop insights into ideas. It could be something even more specific, how does context shape how we judge truth in a text or authority in a text. Again, this will depend on whatever text type, or text I should say, you've chosen, but you can still do that kind of discursive, persuasive writing, and then moving into creative. So these imaginative rewrites, perhaps you're having students flip perspectives here, where they're choosing a
Mm.
significant moment or theme or event within their text and rewriting it from a very different point of view. Because not only will that get them
Yeah.
to engage with that form of the writer, but get them to think about their own form and toolkit as a writer. Even audience
Mm.
shift rewrites. Students can take something that they've drafted before and rewrite it for a completely different audience member,
Yeah.
a very specific, perhaps an audience, representative of the text. And even having these peer writing activities, I think this is another great way to craft activities, is doing a lot of workshopping
Mm.
and peer reflection
Mm.
and peer work here. I mean, as a teacher, you're going to also provide your own feedback, but really getting students to perhaps rotate through some drafting or editing stations. You could have an editing
Yeah.
station that's all on a figurative language, an editing station that's all about tone, for example. So
Mm.
being really,
Mm.
really deliberate with the techniques that you want students to perhaps be playing around with, in order to develop their own writing voice here, I think,
Yeah.
Adriel.
Yeah. I like the fact that you said, you got to be deliberate with what you're focusing in on, what you want your students to be looking at. Because every year you're going to have students that are, stronger at maybe some aspect of creative writing. For example, developing atmosphere in your opening sort of sequence, or, being able to embed like a motif of some sort within their piece, if we're talking creative writing. Um,
Yeah.
so again, it's important that your activities are deliberate, as you've just mentioned. And I think it's important also because, again, every single school setting is different. And this is, I guess, one of the things that you sort of discussed here. There are a variety of activities we can do. It's about us as the teacher being able to identify, well, which are the ones that are going to be most relevant to our students, in order for them to engage with the
Mhm.
skills, as per the content point, either responding or the creating, composing part. Um, so I think that is definitely something that you've covered quite well there in terms of the deliberate nature. I think chunking your activities as well is very significant. I love the idea of peer work,
Mhm.
um,
Yeah.
because if you're not chunking your activities, it's basically going to fall flat. This is the new generation we're part of. Remember, they're a TikTok generation where everything's like 7 or 8 seconds and
Small bites. Mhm.
small bites. You like that's the way we sort of have to teach. I know it's frustrating because a lot of us are part of the older generation. We're like, oh, attention span and concentration. Like we can get to that, but you need to start at where the students are. So having
Mhm.
heaps and heaps of activities, being able to differentiate. I think some of the guiding questions that we've provided in the program will definitely be beneficial for this. But yeah, chunking your activities. I love that idea of peer work as well, because imagine this: you've got a class of 20 kids, or 24 kids, I think, is the maximum amount in the department schools there. If all 24 kids are asking for your, what's the word, affirmation. Okay, you're right, keep going. It's going to take you the whole lesson just to get through one activity. Whereas if you're doing pair shares or if you're doing group work, obviously having scaffolded it really well with proper guided questions. Again, you have to provide that framework for the teachers. But this is how we sort of craft those activities where students can experiment and then thus reflect, which we're going to sort of move on to in a second. But no, you definitely covered that quite well. Deliberate techniques and focuses and peer work. Wonderful stuff there, Bill.
Thank you.
All right, let's move on to our next question now, and we are going to look at how we help students transition their compositions in preparation for the assessment. So the summative assessment task, as you sort of alluded to previously. How do we help the students transition here?
Yeah, I think in this phase here, this is usually the last 2-3 weeks of the term where, students are working on that task. Perhaps you're workshopping a bit more in the specifics of the task with them. You might be at a school that has a drafting policy and you're engaging in, more official teacher drafting. I think what's important here is that students are understanding that they're shifting what they've understood critically and creatively about the text, and they're using that insight, but they're representing it through their own kind of style here. So I guess a kind of driving question that might work for this is how can I transform my conceptual or critical understanding of the text or understanding of language, context, and form into a polished, purposeful composition that is, sophisticated in its control and expression. So I think what's really important here is, again, like you said with the last phase chunking, we really need to make sure that students are starting with, well, what is the purpose and the intent of my response for my assessment task? Because I find a lot of students have trouble transitioning their skills and what they've got in their toolkit so far into a response when they're not really sure what they're writing and why they are writing it. Yeah, so, I think here students need to consider what their perspective is on the task, elements of their own style, and perhaps because it's that reading to write assessment, you might be asking your students to engage with certain conventions or features of their core text or of the core and related text. That could be via a stylistic technique, via an idea, or via both, because that's really mimicking Module C, isn't it? I think here you need to be, this is where we're very clear with, this is the assignment, this is what we're doing. Perhaps you're offering a brainstorm. I think a lot of teachers could probably use their previous assessment tasks for this, the old reading to write version. But please be very mindful of the specific responding outcome points and the fact that, your understanding points are a little bit more niche in this new reading to write unit, or I think they are at least. I think they're really deliberate on like codes, conventions, genre, that kind of stuff. So then, you might be creating an assessment task where you're asking the students to represent an experience or conceptual idea they studied in the model. You might, in the module, or in their core text, you might be asking them to embed some aesthetic language forms, features, or choices that they were engaging with in their core. You might even be asking them to show a specific contextual awareness. So, if your school is doing like the Great Gatsby, for example, perhaps you're asking them to comment on, that idea of the American dream. So, for this, usually a kind of prose fiction sort of response is common here. You might be doing something a bit more hybrid with imaginative and discursive, or you might be getting them to do vignette features if your text was vignette. I think you have a lot of option here. I think most people will do the prose fiction because it's probably the most straightforward for the students and translates really easily into Module C. But I think as well, because conventions plays a big focus in the outcomes for this unit, your particular, what you're getting them to craft an imaginative on might have to do with perhaps a deliberate subversion maybe of conventions,
Mm, mm,
or using their own stylistic features to represent certain
yeah.
conventions. So that's where I think, yeah, all of us need to be really mindful of, make sure we're transferring whatever is our old reading to write assessment to make sure it kind of fits with those outcomes that we've been assessing and been asked to assess. Yeah. And then obviously we've
Mm,
got the reflective component here too, right, Adriel? So I think it's
yeah.
good to do then also 300-400 reflections. So students will reflect how they've understood style, perspective,
Mm,
representation, context, audience in the module. This is also the perfect place for them to verbalize the didactic intent,
mm,
or the
mm,
purpose or messaging, And if you guys are listening to this and thinking, I need to brush up a bit on, creative writing, like we have plenty of episodes to do with creative
yeah.
writing. Angel did some fabulous ones on crafting for Module C in the HSC as a marker of that section. So please do go back and, find those episodes. There's more information on those writing
Mm,
styles there, and lots of great strategies too. But really how this module has influenced students in their reading of a text, reading of these
yeah.
representations, and then how they're reflecting that in their own creative writing,
Mm,
particularly
mm,
with advanced. You're probably trying to get them to go more towards the justifying their choices rather than just explaining them. That is
yeah.
generally the language that's used, yeah, when they're doing this in Year 12 as well. So preparing
Yeah.
them for that idea of you're not just going to tell me what you've done in your story, but why. The
Yeah.
justifying is coming back to what the task is asking of you, but also
Mm,
the why,
mm,
or why you've chosen to craft your particular story with those particular ideas to reflect that. So there
yeah.
is a bit of work to be done here, like for sure. But,
Yeah.
some activities you could be doing along the way while students are workshopping. We've got some suggestions like marking
Mm,
simulation,
mm,
yeah, where you're giving them different samples and then a criteria and maybe where they might fit. You might get students to, you might be a school that maybe doesn't offer drafting. I know particularly
mm,
selective schools have to be very lock and key about that. So perhaps you're doing a bit of a formative task here, where there is a little
yeah.
stimulus that's going to encourage them to at least have an idea or a scope of what they might be writing, and then the teacher could give feedback, peers could give feedback, and even offering
Yeah.
like a draft conference kind of workshop, or that could be one-to-one, that could be small group, depending again on your school's
Yeah.
assessment policy there. But really getting students to look at their structuring, their stylistic choices, whether they've hit the demands of the task, and just their clarity, their expression, perhaps even their critical or conceptual insight. So I think ultimately with this, we're asking students to transition from, this is what I saw and understood of my text, and this is how I can translate those ideas, but in my own unique way, in my own unique style,
Yeah.
um, sort of blurring the lines between, I think, critical and creative being distinct things. They kind of work
Yeah.
because I think the process and the ideas and the way that you plan and map out your story is very critical, I think. And then
Yeah.
the way that you actually bring that story to fruition is your creative. So I think that's some
Mm,
suggestions we have for you guys in our program here.
yeah. Yeah. No, it's fantastic, Bill. You've definitely covered that in quite a bit of depth there in the short amount of time that we do have. I do like the fact that you're mentioning the sense that, you like work smart, not hard as a teacher. Recreate some of those old assessment tasks and adapt them, because we all know the struggle of having to come up with things from scratch. So we all are quite time poor with all the different tasks that you have available. Sorry, on your plate in the school year, and especially we look at this time now winding down towards the end of the year, and we're thinking, oh yeah, cool, I get to have a little bit of time off. Well, really, if you're teaching a senior class, or if we have the introduction of a brand new syllabus next year, your holiday is going to be spent looking at some of this stuff, and you want to make your life a little bit easier. So that idea of adaptation is definitely something that we encourage, and we definitely think is going to be useful for you as our listeners.
Mhm.
But yeah, look, I will say this as well when it comes to assessment. This is the first assessment task that your students are sitting after stage 4 and stage 5, and this is where the rubber hits the road for a lot of the students. And we're going to start to see, and you're going to start to see where they're at in terms of their writing, in terms of their reading skills with this assessment task. So those are two important things that I think, as a teacher, it's a good sort of assessment tool for us to gauge where your class is at, especially in advanced English. A lot of students at this point have selected it either because their parents have told them to, or because they need something, or whatever it may be. Um, but it's a good wake up call for some of our students as well, and it's a great tool for you as a teacher to sort of see, okay, cool, what do I do now when we move into our critical study or close study of the texts moving forward, whether you're in advanced or you're standard English. It's a good sort of tool. Again, assessment is to see where the students are at. It's not the be all and end all. It's for us as teachers to gauge, okay, cool, rightfully so for the students to see where they're at, but also as us as a teacher. So really also like take into consideration like your summative assessments. Belle will give a great few suggestions. She has gone through a few already today. Reach out if you guys have anything that you have used in the past that you think will be very effective for this type of assessment task. We're definitely keen to hear. We've got ears to hear. We love the discourse. We by no means are saying we know everything. We're just sort of up here having a bit of a yap and a bit of a yarn as to some of the things that we have come across, and are trying to make life easier for teachers because we know it's hard. We do know it's
Yeah.
hard. But look, thank you so much, Belle. That was wonderful. Do you have any final tips for the program that our listeners could probably take on board with them?
I think just the final thing is to make sure you're backward mapping. So if you are reusing a previous unit of work or your old reading to write and you're refreshing it, you just, I think, be very mindful of engaging with those more nuanced outcomes now.
Mm.
And if you backward map with your assessment, so if you look at how your assessment can exemplify those responding and understanding outcome points, and start with that as like your basis, and then work back, because you might find your old program has, at least 60, 70, 80% of activities that you can keep, because they might, we are very skills based in the way that we normally teach anyway as English teachers, particularly with the addition of the English textual concepts in the last several years. So you might find you have a lot that align. I think it's very good even to just go through and highlight or identify or maybe color code which ones look like they're going to align with outcomes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then that way you can visually see how much. You might find you don't need to add too much. You might find just the wording or the adjustments. But I think if you need to start with that kind of assessment, does that align? Then work back in your unit. Do my activities align to that assessment? And then are they kind of connecting to those outcomes? I think that, I know that's a lot of work. I apologize. Well, we've sort of created this program in the hopes that it's less work because it's mapped out for you. You could just sub in whatever extra activities you like for your text. But I think ultimately, like we always say, Adriel, we're backward mapping from, because the assessment is the end goal. The assessment is summative. It's what we want the students to be able to do and produce and know and reflect and understand as a result of what we've been doing across the term. So if you start there and then work back, hopefully then you'll find that your weekly activities are actually allowing students to build skills and content that they can then use in their assessment. That might take the pressure off, considering it's first term as well.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I love that. No, well done. Thank you, Belle, so much for just going through the resource that you've been working very hard on. And it's been a very long year for the two of us. Like I said, for the two of us, we still obviously have to work. We're still in the teaching profession, and this is a bit of a labor of our love. For just talking all things English, all things teachers. We've got a few exciting things coming up ahead for us. Also listening to teacher stories. It's an exciting little thing that we have in the works at the moment. We've been listening to the two of us quite a bit. So reach out if you're ever interested in maybe wanting to be involved with us a little bit in whatever capacity as
Mhm,
well. We've been really,
mhm.
really privileged to be able to, spend a whole year working on this, and really are excited for what the future holds for us and our Lit Happens community. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, look, Belle, do you have any sort of final well wishes for our listeners for the year?
Have a good rest. You have more than earned it. Definitely take. I know there's a lot of work to be done, but definitely make sure you take some time for yourself, for
Mm,
your families. Fill your cups. We can't pour from an empty cup. So look after yourselves, and well done, and thank you.
yeah. Yeah, 100%. Love that. Look after yourself. If you're not healthy, if you're not in the right space, you're not going to be as effective. So, very, very important. We love everything about this. We look forward to hearing from our listeners. Be sure to keep an eye out on all of our social media platforms. Like we've mentioned before, this resource will be available on Teachers Pay Teachers. The links are available on our respective platforms there. But yeah, look, guys, thank you so much for the year that it has been. We are signing off for 2025, and we will be back bright, ready, early. You may see a few of our rerun episodes, as you sort of alluded to, Bill, in terms of skills and things that may be beneficial for our teachers as they move into the new year. But we're really looking forward to what 2026 holds for us, and we're looking forward to a
Yeah.
few of the resources that we will be putting out there for you guys. So, hey guys, have a blessed Christmas. Enjoy the time with your family. Enjoy your holiday period. Um, recharging, re-energizing those batteries, and we'll look forward to hearing and sort of seeing how your break has been, and then seeing you guys all in the new year. So, thanks, guys, once again. This is us signing off for 2025.